Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video looks at changing cultures and it's going to cover the reasons for and problems of changing organisational culture. So we defined organisational culture as the norms and values held by the individuals in an organisation that determine how those individuals behave. And there's a cartoon that you could pause and have a look at there that's kind of about this topic of changing culture and why it might be quite difficult to do so. So first of all, culture is really, really important in an organisation, and many people will cite organisational culture as either the reason for joining a particular workplace or as a reason for leaving that particular workplace. I worked in a school once that really was quite a miserable place to be because of the organisational culture there. It developed what I would call a toxic culture where people bonded and interacted by moaning about being at work, and it wasn't a good place to be. You didn't look forward to going in. People moaned about what they had to do, and it just didn't make for a positive working environment, and you usually left work feeling depleted of energy and drained. And that's what a toxic culture can do. If you look at examples like Enron, RBS, their RBS in up to 2008, if you do some research into that, you can find out how that toxic culture affected the organisation and almost led to RBS failing. And if it hadn't been bailed out by the government, it would have failed as a result of their toxic culture. So we might need to change. If a toxic culture has kind of emerged, then we would want to change that. Maybe there's been a change of leadership and a change of leadership style, in which case we might need a change of culture in order to manage that organisational better. Maybe there are divergent cultures within a culture. So as different departments and functional areas and teams build up, they all develop their own little culture. And maybe some of those cultures have developed really positively, and we want to spread that across the rest of the organisation. Alternatively, maybe some of the cultures developed in the little teams aren't what we want, and we want to kind of reset the organisational culture so that it becomes more positive and helps us achieve our strategy, essentially. Business growth, organic or external, organic and external. Any type of business growth, as an organisation moves through Griner's different stages of growth, will require a different culture. So, if you think back to Griner's model of growth, we've got the small business, the entrepreneurial business that's started by its owner. As it's small, the owner can interact with everyone, be on top of everything that's going on, make all the decisions. The culture is going to have to change as that organisation gets bigger and power is kind of ceded away from the owner. Maybe we need to empower staff, or maybe we need to put more monitoring in place to ensure that decisions are being made that are for the benefit of the company, and that might require a change of culture. Changes in the competitive environment, which means we need to change our strategy. That might require a new culture. We might need to become more innovative and more embracing of risk, for example, or quite simply a change in strategy for similar reasons. If we want to become a more innovative company, we've got to be more accepting as a company of risk, and that involves changing the culture. So changing culture can be extremely difficult to do. If you think about maybe the difficulty that you would have changing, say, the culture within your family, like what people talk to each other about when you eat your food, or changing the culture in your school, changing people's attitudes and how they interact with each other, that can actually be really difficult. And there's a cartoon here that's quite good, showing the guy flying and saying, once you've done this, once you've mastered this technique, we'll move on to something more challenging, like changing your corporate culture. So, saying that flying using your arms is actually easier than changing your corporate culture. So let's have a look at why that might be. Well, culture tends to be very ingrained, and for starters, it can be hard to identify what the culture is. You'll know that when you travel abroad, one of the reasons for travelling and living abroad is that you actually get an understanding of your own culture much better by being outside of it, and you can start to question things by being outside of it. But it can actually be ingrained and quite hard to identify when you're within it. And if you can't identify where you are, it becomes very difficult to know what to do to get to where you need to be. The management or the people who are pushing through this cultural change will need to present a very clear vision of what the culture should be and get people on side in achieving that, which can be difficult to do. We can think of Cotter and Schlesinger's, reasons that people resist change, fear, inertia, etc. It might be difficult to identify the culture that we need to achieve our strategy. So using that example of becoming a more innovative company, we need to be prepared to reinvest, say, 10% of our profit in research and development and be prepared to lose that money, because not all research and development comes through. And if you're a very risk-averse company, that idea of potentially sacrificing your profits on something that won't work might be very difficult to kind of change that attitude within people. We're going to need to ensure that leaders set the example. Leaders really can drive an organisational culture. What leaders accept and and the images that leaders show will determine to a certain extent the culture. And leaders might be saying one thing, we need to respect people's opinions and let people put their ideas forward and become a more inclusive company, and that needs to be our culture. But if they're going ahead and making all of those decisions themselves, the culture's saying one thing but something else is happening. That would be a weak culture that's emerging where the values and the behaviours are not lining up. It can involve restructuring, changing culture. If you want to become a more inclusive organisation, that can involve delayering, getting rid of people's jobs, which can obviously lead to resistance. And cultures are emergent and they're affected by both internal and external factors. So what I mean by that is a culture is continually evolving and changing. It's not like this is our culture now and this is our culture forever. That culture is continually evolving as people change, as the organisation changes. And while you might be able to influence what that culture is, it's certainly very difficult to manage that culture. And there's going to be internal influences, like the people working for you, the finance available, the leadership that affect the culture, and external factors like the economic situation. People are worried about losing their jobs, for example. That might change their behaviour within the organisation. So there's huge numbers of factors that affect culture, and it can be very difficult to change.